On Thanksgiving night, my mother left a cold, foil-wrapped paper plate on the front porch and drove my sister to a lavish holiday dinner without me. I packed my entire life into my rusted sedan that very hour, drove 2,000 miles across the country, and cut off all contact. 7 years later, when my mother and sister walked into my executive boardroom begging for a mortgage bailout, I gave them the exact same cold response they gave me. My name is Harper Lee. To understand how a cold paper plate left on a rain-soaked wooden porch in Portland, Oregon, eventually triggered the total financial collapse of my mother's estate and the judicial foreclosure of her home, you have to understand the toxic dynamic that governed my childhood. In our household, parental love was never shared. It was a luxury reserved exclusively for my older sister Daphne, while I was treated as an invisible, second-class servant whose sole purpose was to facilitate their comfort. My father passed away from sudden heart failure when I was 9 years old. He left behind a modest life insurance policy and a craftsman-style house in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Portland. Instead of using those funds to secure our family's long-term financial stability, my mother, Valerie Lee, treated the insurance payout as her personal bank account to indulge my sister's every vanity. Daphne was 2 years older than me, gifted with a manipulative charm that Valerie idolized. From an early age, Daphne realized she could get whatever she wanted simply by playing into Valerie's obsession with social status. If Daphne wanted high-end designer wardrobes, private horseback riding lessons, or weekend spa trips, Valerie found a way to fund them, even if it meant letting utility bills sit unpaid or taking out high-interest personal lines of credit. I was assigned a completely different role in the family, the household worker and designated scapegoat. While Daphne spent her weekends shopping, attending parties, or lounging in her room, Valerie forced me to clean the house, handle the grocery shopping, prepare weeknight dinners, and maintain the yard. Whenever I dared to ask why Daphne was never expected to contribute to the household, Valerie would fly into an absolute rage, accusing me of being bitter, jealous, and resentful of my sister's beauty. The emotional neglect deepened into systematic holiday exclusion as I grew older. When I turned 14, Valerie took Daphne on an extravagant week-long trip to Southern California, leaving me home alone with a list of deep-cleaning household chores and a drawer of canned soup. On my 16th birthday, Daphne was gifted a brand new laptop and a $500 shopping spree, while Valerie handed me a clearance bath set from a local drugstore, complaining loudly about how expensive my school supplies had been that semester. I quickly realized that my mother didn't just favor Daphne, she deeply resented my presence. I looked like my father, quiet, analytical, and practical, which constantly collided with Valerie's shallow obsession with image and luxury. To protect myself, I learned to keep my head down and plan my exit. The moment I turned 16, I took 2 part-time jobs, working early mornings behind the counter at an independent bakery and late afternoons shelving books at a local library. Every dollar I earned was deposited into a private bank account that I opened the day I turned 17, keeping the account statements hidden inside an old, hollowed-out binder in my bedroom closet. By the time I graduated from high school at 18, I had saved $4,200 through sheer discipline. Then came the Thanksgiving that severed our relationship forever. It was a chilly, rain-swept Thursday in late November. For 3 days prior, Valerie had forced me to handle every single detail of the Thanksgiving preparations. I prepped a 20-pound turkey, chopped mountains of vegetables, baked 3 pies from scratch, polished the silver serving trays, and scrubbed the dining room until it was spotless. Valerie had managed to secure an invitation to a holiday dinner hosted by the Montgomery family, an influential real estate dynasty living in an exclusive gated community in Lake Oswego. Valerie was desperate to network with the Montgomerys, hoping to introduce Daphne to their eldest son, who managed a successful commercial broker agency. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 hours before we were scheduled to leave, Daphne walked downstairs wearing an $800 silk designer dress that Valerie had bought her earlier that week. Daphne walked into the dining room, picked up an antique crystal pitcher filled with dark red mulled wine that I had just finished brewing, and casually tipped it over onto the center of the imported linen table runner and cream-colored area rook. The dark red liquid soaked into the fabric, staining the floorboards beneath. I gasped, rushing forward with a towel. "Daphne, what are you doing?" Daphne didn't even flinch. She immediately let out a loud, dramatic sob and threw herself onto the couch, screaming just as Valerie rushed into the room. "Mom," Daphne wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Harper lost her temper because I told her she couldn't wear my coat. She threw the pitcher at me and said she was going to ruin my night so the Montgomerys wouldn't like me." I stood there, holding the wet towel, stunned by the sheer audacity of her lie. "Mom, that's not what happened. She poured it out on purpose." Valerie didn't ask a single question. She didn't examine the rug or notice that Daphne didn't have a single stain on her dress. Her face contorted into an expression of pure, unadulterated venom as she stepped toward me. "You malicious, jealous little monster!" Valerie shrieked, her voice shaking the walls. "You have been trying to sabotage your sister's success your entire life. You are so consumed by spite that you would ruin our standing with the Montgomery family? I spent 3 days cooking this entire meal. I cleaned this entire house. Why do you always believe her lies without even checking the truth?" "Shut your mouth," Valerie barked, stepping into my space. "You are not fit to sit at a table with decent people. You are staying right here." Valerie walked over to the kitchen counter, grabbed a flimsy paper plate, and slapped a single dry slice of turkey breast and a spoonful of cold stuffing. She wrapped it loosely in aluminum foil, walked out to the front porch, and tossed the plate onto the cold, wet wooden deck beside the welcome mat. She turned back to me, her eyes dead and cold. "There is your Thanksgiving dinner," Valerie said icily. "You can eat it outside in the rain like the ungrateful animal you are. Don't you dare step foot inside the living room while we're gone. And make sure this rug is scrubbed clean before we return." Valerie took Daphne by the arm, escorted her out to the driveway, and locked the heavy front door behind them. Standing near the window, I watched my mother drive away into the stormy Oregon evening, laughing with Daphne as their taillights disappeared down the street. I looked out at the cold aluminum foil plate sitting in the pouring rain on the porch. In that moment, something inside me snapped quietly into place. The pain, the longing for maternal love, and the desperate wish for fairness evaporated completely, replaced by an unshakable, icy clarity. I realized that if I stayed in that house, Valerie and Daphne would continue to destroy my spirit until there was nothing left. I retrieved the spare key hidden under a porch brick, walked inside, and went straight upstairs. I pulled 3 large canvas duffel bags from my closet. Within 45 minutes, I packed every piece of clothing I owned, my birth certificate, high school transcripts, laptop, and my hidden binder containing my $4,200 in savings. I didn't write a note. I didn't clean the spilled wine. I left the house exactly as it was. I loaded my bags into the trunk of my 2008 sedan, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. As I passed the front porch, I saw the cold paper plates sitting under the porch light in the rain. I didn't look back. I drove onto Interstate 5 and headed south, driving 2,000 miles through the night until I reached Austin, Texas. When I arrived in Austin, I knew nobody. I rented a small studio apartment above a quiet repair shop, taking a night shift position at a commercial freight hub while working mornings as an entry-level clerk for a local property management company. I changed my phone number,
closed my Oregon bank account, and blocked every social media account connected to my mother, sister, and former acquaintances. I erased myself from their world completely. Over the next 7 years, I poured every ounce of my energy into building an unassailable life. I enrolled at the University of Texas at Austin, working 60 hours a week while maintaining top grades to earn my bachelor's degree in commercial real estate finance and asset management. After graduation, I was hired as a junior risk analyst at a corporate debt restructuring firm. My sharp analytical skills, relentless focus, and ability to identify undervalued commercial paper allowed me to advance rapidly. By 25, I partnered with 2 senior institutional investors to co-found Crestview Asset Management, a specialized private equity and debt acquisition firm based in downtown Austin. As managing director and chief executive officer, I oversaw a portfolio handling tens of millions of dollars in commercial debt, distressed mortgage acquisitions, and asset recovery across the western United States. I purchased a sleek, sunlit penthouse overlooking the Austin skyline, drove a high-end sedan, and built a tight circle of loyal, authentic friends who valued integrity above all else. My life was peaceful, prosperous, and entirely under my control. Meanwhile, back in Portland, Valerie and Daphne were learning what life looked like without a scapegoat to exploit. Without my unpaid labor and financial discipline keeping the household afloat, Valerie's finances steadily crumbled. Daphne's taste for luxury only escalated as she reached her 20s. Refusing to hold a steady job, Daphne convinced Valerie that she was destined to run a high-end luxury event planning agency called Velvet and Vine Events. Desperate to maintain their illusion of wealth, Valerie liquidated her remaining savings and retirement funds to seed Daphne's venture. When the business began hemorrhaging money due to Daphne's incompetence, extravagant personal spending, and total lack of accounting oversight, Daphne persuaded Valerie to take out a $620,000 secondary commercial loan secured by a personal guarantee and a primary mortgage lien against Valerie's Portland house.
Predictably, within 2 years, Velvet and Vine Events collapsed into bankruptcy. Daphne abandoned the business, leaving behind massive defaulted vendor debts, unpaid equipment leases, and tax penalties. The commercial lender declared the $620,000 loan in default and initiated judicial foreclosure proceedings against Valerie's home. Desperate to avoid eviction, Valerie hired a debt workout broker to identify the holder of the defaulted note. What Valerie didn't realize was that 2 months earlier, Crestview Asset Management, my firm in Austin, had acquired a large portfolio of distressed West Coast residential and commercial mortgage notes from primary lenders, which included the defaulted loan on Valerie's property. The broker informed Valerie that the executive holding final authority over her foreclosure file was listed in corporate filings as H. Lee, Managing Director of Crestview Asset Management in Austin, Texas. Valerie and Daphne assumed H. Lee was an elderly male investor or distant relative who might be persuaded through emotional pleading. Believing they could negotiate a hardship waiver, Valerie used her last remaining credit card limit to purchase 2 plane tickets to Austin 2 days before Thanksgiving. It was a bright, clear Tuesday afternoon when my executive assistant knocked on my office door. "Harper, the representatives regarding the Portland property default file have arrived for their scheduled review in boardroom B," my assistant reported. I adjusted the sleeves of my tailored blazer, picked up the blue case file from my desk, and looked out over the city skyline. "Thank you, Sarah," I replied calmly. "Have Daniel meet me inside." I walked down the quiet corridor toward boardroom B, accompanied by my chief legal counsel, Daniel Thorne. Inside the glass-walled boardroom, Valerie and Daphne sat at the long mahogany table. Valerie looked aged and stressed, wearing an outdated coat that showed noticeable wear. Daphne sat beside her, nervously scrolling on her phone, wearing heavy makeup to mask her anxiety.
As the heavy double doors opened, Valerie stood up, preparing a practiced, tragic smile. "Mr. Lee, thank you so much for agreeing to hear a desperate mother's—" Valerie froze mid-sentence. Her voice vanished. Her jaw dropped and her face turned pale as chalk. Daphne gasped, her phone slipping from her fingers and dropping onto the table. I walked calmly to the head of the table, pulled out the leather executive chair, and sat down. Daniel Thorne sat to my right, opening his laptop. The room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. "Harper?" Daphne stammered, her voice high and trembling. "You? How are you sitting in that seat?" Valerie's hands began shaking uncontrollably. She gripped the edge of the conference table, staring at me in sheer disbelief. "Harper, you own this firm?" I opened the case file, keeping my voice crisp, measured, and entirely free of emotion. "Good afternoon, Valerie. Good afternoon, Daphne," I said quietly. "I am H. Lee, Managing Director and CEO of Crestview Asset Management. We are here to review File 409, the non-performing commercial note secured by the property in Portland, Oregon." Daphne stood up abruptly, her face flushing red. "Harper, what kind of sick game is this? You've been living in a penthouse in Texas while we've been struggling for years? Do you have any idea what we've been going through?" Daniel Thorne raised his hand, his tone icy and sharp. "Ma'am, sit down and lower your voice immediately, or security will escort you from the premises." Daphne sank back into her chair, glaring at me with bitter resentment.
Valerie began to cry, a dramatic, loud sob, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "Harper, my sweet child, thank God I found you. You have no idea how my heart has bled for 7 years. I looked everywhere for you. I cried every single night praying my baby girl was safe." I looked at her with cool, detached clarity. "Valerie, you didn't look for me. You didn't report me missing because you didn't want the neighbors asking questions. You didn't call my friends because you were relieved you no longer had to hide your favoritism." Valerie gasped, clutching her chest. "That's not true. I loved you. We are family, Harper. You cannot let corporate attorneys take my home. You have millions. All you have to do is sign a waiver and forgive this debt." I turned a page in the audit file. "Let's review the facts. Over the past 3 years, you pulled $620,000 out of your home equity to fund Daphne's failed venture. Our forensic accounting audit shows that over $200,000 of those loan funds were transferred directly into Daphne's personal accounts for luxury travel, clothing, and high-end vehicle leases." Daphne went silent, looking away from the table. "This was not an unfortunate business loss," I continued, looking directly at my sister. "This was reckless financial exploitation and total disregard for real estate equity." Valerie leaned forward, her voice breaking into a desperate plea. "Harper, please, it's Thanksgiving week. Where am I supposed to go? I am your mother. You can't leave your own mother out in the cold on Thanksgiving." I closed the blue file with a firm, quiet clap that settled across the boardroom. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, letting 7 years of hard-won independence rest between us. 7 years ago, on Thanksgiving night, I cooked an entire holiday meal for you. You let Daphne pour wine on the floor, lied about my character, and threw a cold paper plate of scraps wrapped in foil onto the rain-soaked porch. You locked the door and drove away to celebrate at a luxury estate without giving me a second thought. Valerie's lips trembled, but no words came out. You taught me that night exactly what family meant to you. You taught me that when someone becomes an inconvenience, you put them out in the cold. Today, I am simply applying the exact standard you taught me." "Harper, please," she wept hysterically, collapsing back into her chair. "I'm sorry. Please don't take my house." Crestview Asset Management will not issue a debt waiver or loan modification.
I said, standing up from the table. The judicial foreclosure process will proceed as scheduled on December 1st. You have 30 days to vacate the property before the sheriff's sale. I turned to Daniel Thorne. Daniel, please serve them with the formal notice of claim and escort them to the lobby. I turned my back on their frantic pleas and weeping, walking calmly out of boardroom B and returning to my office.
3 weeks later, the Oregon Circuit Court finalized the judicial foreclosure sale of the Portland house. The property was sold at public auction to satisfy the primary debt. With no remaining equity, no savings, and ruined credit, Valerie was forced to move into a tiny, subsidized one-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. Daphne, facing aggressive debt recovery actions from unpaid trade creditors, was forced to sell her luxury possessions and take an entry-level retail job to cover her living expenses. On Thanksgiving Day, 7 years after I left Portland, I hosted a warm, joyful holiday dinner in my Austin penthouse. Surrounding my table were true friends, mentors, and colleagues who valued integrity and mutual respect. As I looked out over the glowing Austin skyline, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace. I had survived the cold porch of rejection, built my own kingdom of success, and proved that true strength lies in knowing your worth and never allowing toxic people to dictate your future. Personal advice. If you grew up in a family environment defined by severe scapegoating, emotional neglect, or overt favoritism, understand that your personal value is not tied to winning the approval of those who exploit you. Do not allow guilt or weaponized family obligations to pull you back into toxic relationships where your boundaries are continually ignored. Focus on building total financial, emotional, and personal independence. Protect your assets. Surround yourself with authentic people who respect your worth. And remember that walking away from toxic family members is not an act of malice. It is a vital choice for your own dignity and peace.